Hello! This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and most of them will show up here in my chat room. The chat room is on the screen because I have no guest today. So we can all share the chat room together. And today is theoretically the roundup of interesting stories from the week. But looking at the stories from the week, I don't know that we're really going to talk about that exactly today. I think we'll maybe be rounding up more of what we've discussed through this week. I'm not quite sure what I can do with an $8 million um, transgender rat or transgender mouse as a story, particularly when it's actually transgenic. But maybe we should take a moment to talk about that because we talk a lot about technology at times. And what exactly is a transgenic mouse? And a transgenic mouse is a mouse that's been genetically altered to have certain human genetic traits. And hello to Renee in the chat room, in order to be used for medical testing. That is what a transgenic mouse is. Apparently, certain conservative Christians, because of the word trans, assumed that it's somehow a transgendered mouse, which is an example of why a zero tolerance policy is never a good idea, because it leads to this kind of stupid knee-jerk reaction. Everything that involves the word trans means something that has crossed a line somewhere, not necessarily any particular line. Transylvania, except for that one song from Rocky Horror Picture Show, is not about transgender issues. It's a region in the Balkans or above the Balkans. I understand also that a photograph of the Enola Gay aeroplane has been removed from U.S. military sites because it involves the word gay, despite the fact that this, I believe, was someone's name once upon a time, and why this plane was named after it in the 1940s. But again, this kind of ridiculous knee-jerk reaction we're seeing all over the place does not speak well of anyone, in my opinion. But is it enough to do any real discussion on? No, but it's interesting as educated people to be looking at headlines like this and asking ourselves, did people not think before they took action? And the answer is, it seems like right now people are not thinking before they take action. And this is a very interesting time to be alive when that is happening. We're seeing all kinds of things um, moving forward and stepping back and walking sideways, and it's um, quite bizarre. And hello to Brian in the chat room. Hello to Kayleen in the chat room. Um, Brian joins us from New York. Renee joins us from Chicago. Kayleen joins us from Australia. Um, it's nice to have a wide listenership. So, in looking at the week's stories to say, what am I going to do a roundup about today? Yeah, I decided no. We'll talk more about multidimensionality. I'm not quite sure what, but we'll continue that conversation. Um, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge some birthdays today. Oh, and Brian says, what a time for me to be doing all the things I do. And yes, considering the line of work Brian is in, it's a very interesting time for that. But for those of us who do work in parts of society that, how can we say, are still trying to work with people's rights and with creating a better world, we must continue to focus on those things. Our absence would be bad. I, you'll continue to see me talking every day, going into the future. Even though when I look at the headlines, I say, wow, what am I doing in this future? But I have ideas as to why I'm here. Maybe we'll talk about those. Now, Kayleen says, I'm happy to talk more on multidimensionality. Multidimensionality is a fascinating subject. I was just about to say, before we get to that, I want to acknowledge some birthdays today. And particularly, I want to acknowledge the birthday of Katrina Kessler, also known as Foxglove, and also known as Saint Katrina of the Paladins. And Katrina was the manager of the World of Witches Museum in Salem many years ago. And she was probably the most creative and capable person I have ever met. And a wonderful person, very kind, very insightful, very generous human being, incredibly talented. And her earthly incarnation was only 23 years, and yet very impactful for all the people whose lives she touched. And hello to Reverend Mary in the chat room, who comes to us under the name of Corellian TV today. Katrina will always be missed by the people who knew her. And this particular birthday seems to have a very particular energy to it. It's also the birthday of Ed the Pagan's brother Ken, also in spirit for many, many years. And we wish to honor his birthday today. And in my circle of friends, it's a big ancestor day. And so to you, beloved ancestors, we honor you on your birthdays. And I also want to wish a happy birthday to Ryan Walsh, our new friend, who shares this birthday also. And I have found, and I don't know if this is exactly multidimensionality, but I have found that when people share a birthday, it's like Isopsophos. When people share a numerological equivalent in their names, there are similarities. Now, of course, you expect that somewhat from astrology. You expect it somewhat from numerology, but I find that you see it. And hello to Lynn in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lynn. And Lynn says, I love the Witches Museum. My sister and I met you there in Salem. Yes, indeed. And, it was quite an experience. And the World of Witches Museum tour was filmed and is available in the archives of Corellian TV. And it was quite interesting. Kayleen says, Yulburu Nyongai, or happy birthday, in the Yagambe language, to all mentioned. And Brian says, I've heard many wonderful things about Foxglove and their work, and probably all the things we would have discussed together. Yes, I'm sure that's true. She was a remarkable person. And I would say she got more living into 23 years than some people get into 70, and more accomplishment. And as I was saying, I found one of the more interesting books I have, and I think I've still got it, is called Yesterday, Today, and Forever by Jean Dixon. And if you're of a certain age, you'll remember Jean Dixon as one of the great psychics of the 1970s and 80s. She became particularly famous by predicting the assassination of President Kennedy, whose circle she traveled in and who I believe she knew. Fascinating woman, but she wrote a number of books, and she wrote, I believe, quite well. And Yesterday, Today, and Forever was a book combining numerology and astrology. And it went through and dealt with every day of the year with the combined influences of numerology and astrology. And it's a fascinating book to see that combination in play. I highly recommend it if you're a student of either of those disciplines. When I went to create the Correllian calendar, this was an influence on me because it was one of the best examples I had seen of combining these uh, different schools of thought together, astrology and numerology. Um, and she went through and she applied the astrological principles together with the numerological meaning of the different dates. Um, so, for example, my birthday is June 11th, and that would make me, by her reckoning, a Gemini of the number two vibration. And her description of that was very, very right on for certainly for my image of myself. But she talks about the character traits of these particular different dates, the colors that are good for them. As I recall, she quite accurately divined that the color for my date would be gray. I'm known for enjoying the color gray in clothing. I was once accused of wearing nothing but the color gray, although that's never exactly been true. But I do like gray. I like to put grays together in different shades to see just what interesting effects you can create from something that is theoretically very neutral. Um, but I also love all other colors. I once asked my mother what her favorite color was, and that was basically her answer. She couldn't really name one because she loved all the colors, but if she had to name one, it would be blue, and I'm also very fond of blue. And Reverend Mary says, "Happy birthday in spirit to Fox, Love, and Ken." Yes, indeed. Um, and speaking of multidimensionality, both of these people in this particular timeline and adjacent timelines had very short incarnations. That doesn't mean that's true in every timeline. And I am sure there are timelines where that may not be true at all. They may be still both going strong. And similarly, I'm quite certain that in other timelines, I had a short incarnation. But here, I'm keeping going and plan to keep going for a while. And when we work with timelines, particularly when we work with trying to get glimpses of other timelines, um, sometimes what we see is very interesting. I spoke about Lady Crystal and her similar life as a red-haired artist, and the fact that I eventually met what I believe to be that person. I've also met what I believe to be, I think the phrase is similar. The proper phrase is similar expressions to my own life. That is to say, other incarnations my soul uh, is having, and I've met 4 or 5 of them, I believe, over the years, and it was interesting to see what we had in common. And in most cases, I did not recognize them as being other manifestations of the same soul when I first met them, but I did over time. And in every case, there were certain things very much in common, and yet the general focus of the life was drastically different in many ways. I'm not going to go through and talk about those qualities because I might accidentally identify the people. But I will say one thing that caught my attention is I tended to like myself, or those other expressions of my soul when I met them. And I know that there are certainly some people who I don't think would necessarily get on well with other expressions of their soul if they met them. And I've seen that with a few people too. One of the things I've found is that when you work with incarnation and you work with multidimensionality and you work with parallel lifetimes and similar lifetimes, you will see examples of these things, um, both your own and with other people. And what you draw from them is very important to understanding yourself, I think. And, in the end, understanding ourselves is one of the main reasons that we're here. And I'm amazed. And going back to where we started our conversation today with knee jerk reactions to what appear to be silly things, to me, that's a sign of not understanding yourself. That you feel so lost, you have to have this rigid way of responding to things. Half of what I've talked about this week has been being adaptive and flexible in how we respond to things. I think this is vitally important to life. When we become rigid, we become frightened, we become illogical, and we do foolish things. And I mentioned the transgenic mice. I mentioned the Enola Gay. But let me give you another example of why I personally feel zero tolerance is always a mistake, and the thing that actually convinced me of this in the first place. Back in the 90s, the school drug policies of the 90s, you may remember, likened things like Tylenol to heroin and gave students the same penalty for both of these. And I remember thinking at the time, this is a ridiculous analogy. What message do you think you're sending people? What message are you saying? You can't possibly think these are the same thing. You can't think they're of equal weight. And yet they stood on this. And when we look at today's generation, where many people are making that same kind of knee-jerk reaction, I have to say that those examples are part of why we're here. We should not have done that. We need to remember, if we have another chance to set a better example, not to do that or things like that. We need to remain individual in our reaction to situations, even though we may have guidelines, but we need to be able to take into account what has actually happened, not just some theoretical scenario. And we need to be able to react accordingly. Last night, as one of the first priesthood of the Correllian tradition, I found myself involved in a conversation about someone whose behavior has caused some issues. I'm certainly not going to say anything more about that, but in addressing this, in dealing with this, this issue is vitally important. In all the different times in my life that this issue came up, that someone had done something, this issue comes up. It's not just generally what the action is, it's what are the circumstances. Who is the person? How have they behaved otherwise? What is their character like? Can counseling help the situation? What will make it better? Are they willing to listen? All of these things must affect the choices that we make. If everything we do has a knee-jerk reaction, we will be left with ashes. I think that's part of what we're seeing in the world now. A lot of knee-jerk reactions from people who've gotten themselves so emotionally enthused, so emotionally twisted, that they can't think about their situations. And that's why we're seeing things like the banning of the Enola Gay, which has nothing to do with any of their issues, but still frightens them because they are in such a state of emotional turmoil, they cannot make a logical decision. That's a bad place for a culture to be. But obviously it's where we are. And is that where we are in all dimensions? Obviously not. If we believe in dimensionality, if we believe we've looked into other dimensions, then we must also know that there are other dimensions where we've made other choices. Why is our point of consciousness in this one? Why do we have to deal with this particular set of nonsense instead of some other set of nonsense? And, there are many answers to that, and chances are we'll never really know. I think when we change from one timeline to another, consciously or otherwise, we don't necessarily not always know what the reasons of our higher self were for making that change. Even if we did it consciously, how well we really understand what we've done at this point in human evolution, I think, is questionable. Um, but I did have a thought, because in a lot of ways, this moment is one that we prepared ourselves for decades and hoped to face from a different vantage point. But here we are. And part of my answer is that, in another timeline, we did face this time from that different, more powerful vantage point. And maybe we were not happy with that outcome. And we're trying another way. And that seems to me, at least for the moment, a reasonable answer for why we are in what seems like a more difficult timeline. Maybe it really isn't. Maybe it only seems that way because we don't know what the alternative was going to be. Um, so, being here in this timeline, what do we do? What we always say we do the next right thing. We continue doing our work. What Brian said in the chat room, we continue doing our work. We continue doing the best we can to build a better world. Will we be successful? Well, if we look at history, there are certainly times when people did build a better world. And there are times they could not. And we won't know during our lifetime if we really succeeded in trying to build that better world or not, because it's only from some future lifetime looking back that we'll truly see the outcome. But that doesn't mean we don't keep working on it. And Kayleen says, something about multidimensionality that helped me with choices was knowing that a parallel of mine in Europe was living as a musician. So I could let my desire to be a musician go and do my other tasks. Exactly. That was one of the things that caught my attention with Lady Crystal and her artist parallel. In this life, Lady Crystal often wanted to be an artist, usually for short periods of time. And she had talent and she was good. And she created some lovely pieces of art over the years, but it never really held her attention. Realizing that she had um, another expression of her soul living as an artist explained why she was not able to do that in this life, or didn't need to do it in this life. Her soul was having that experience, just as Kayleen's soul is having that experience as a musician. I had to go out and do all these things and be the artist and the religious leader and the writer and occasional poet and videographer. Um, but I've looked at what some of my other lives have done, and one thing I will have to say is that several of them did choose to devote their lives to a cause. Not the same one that I have done in this life, but a cause. Not all of them. Um, but yeah, it seems to be part of the soul's expression at the moment. When we do look at these parallel lives, and the way I'm using the term a parallel life is another version of this life you are leading that has taken other choices. And a similar life, a similar expression, is a totally different life that your soul is incarnated in. But you can see them both through meditation, sometimes through dreams. And it can be very instructive in terms of how you're living this life. And you can also meet them. And that is a fascinating thing when it happens. I have to say, I've talked a lot about writing the autobiography, and it is slightly in the works. It is beginning. It's going to be a while because there's just so much to say. And of course, it's not all going to be in that book because it's not all equally worth reading. But, one of the things I remember, Lady Crystal and I, when we were living in Bloomington Normal, Illinois, which, believe it or not, we once did, we were downtown one evening and we were waiting for my late wife to meet us. I don't remember the circumstances now. But we were walking up the street and we happened to look down an alleyway. This was a very interesting alleyway. It was between brick buildings. It was a brick pavement. It had very simple lighting. And we looked at each other and we both realized if we chose to walk up that alleyway, where we came out was not going to be the same world we went in. We recognized we were looking at an option of changing things. And we chose not to. We stayed where we were because we didn't know what those changes would be. And we were relatively happy where we were. In fact, looking back, I would say we were quite happy where we were. But Spirit did give us that choice to make a conscious change if we wanted to. They're usually not like that, but sometimes you'll find situations where if I do this, even though logically there should be no consequence for it, it's going to make a big change. And as a magical person, you must pay attention to that. When we make those changes, and I've made them a few times in life, I've switched my dimensions consciously more than once. And what I say is that the thing that you're trying to change has to be important enough for whatever else gets changed. Because you don't know what that's going to be. And it may not be things that you would desire, but what is true in one dimension won't necessarily hold up in the next one. And hello to Corey Judy in the chat room. It's good to see you, Corey Judy. When we make these changes, and this is true for anything in magic, even things that don't seem as obviously disruptive, but whenever we do something that's going to change the nature of reality, we have to remember it may change more than we're counting on. And therefore, we must think about what we're doing. That's why when we do spell work, we keep our focus on what it is we're trying to do. And even then, sometimes it will change other things because all of the different threads in the web connect to one another. And, if you pull one, more than one is going to move. But that's only a problem when it's a problem. Now, we have changed our next metaphysical auction from tonight to a week from tomorrow. So I'll be talking to you about that next week and some of the things we're going to have. But that is my segue into a word from our sponsors. And why a word from our sponsors? Because we love our sponsors.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next Metaphysical and Magic Auction will be next Saturday, the Ides of March. So take a stab at that and join us on March 15th at 7 p.m. Central for our next Metaphysical and Magic auction. And I hope that you have had a lovely day. I hope that you enjoyed our discussion today about multidimensionality and various related subjects. I will be back on Monday, and who knows what we'll be talking about then. Maybe it'll still be multidimensionality. Maybe it'll be some other aspect of magic or metaphysics. I do notice that people have been enjoying our deeper discussions of metaphysics, so probably we'll be continuing along that line. And yeah, if there's anything particular you'd like to see me discuss, let me know. Mention it on my Facebook page, mention it in the chat room, and we'll see if we can't make a day for that. And now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we rejoice in this walk we walk together. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to be with us and to help us to remain flexible and adaptive and to avoid knee-jerk reactions, but to think about things we want in our lives and take the actions that will bring them to us. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you. With great love and knowing you're always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you on Monday. And before I go, Corey says, I'm having trouble getting to the higher tier. That would be on my Patreon. And if you like my work and you'd like to support my work, the best way to do that is by joining my Patreon at revdonlewis.com. Corey, Judy, if you send me an email through Patreon, I will see if I can't help you with that. And we'll see what we can do. So everyone have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday.